Hey Boat Dragons, I'm so glad you joined me on the channel today. We are going to be talking about the best books that I read in 2024. And as you can see, I've got my Doctor Who shirt on and I've got my fez on because fezzes are cool. I'm just feeling Doctor Who-y today, so... So if you have some snacks or a drink that you want to grab to watch this video, get that now because we are going to get right down to the business. Now, I do want to make a couple of honorable mentions here. The first one is the Tawny Man trilogy by Robin Hobb. I read all three books in the Tawny Man trilogy in 2024, and I loved the entire series. I can't really pick which one of those is my favorite. You probably remember from last year, I had the same thing happen. I couldn't pick which one of the Live Ship Traders books was my favorite, so I just made it an honorable mention, and I'm doing that here again. It is definitely the best series that I read this year, the best completed series. And oh, guys, it's so good. I really had a great time, and it's by far my favorite Robin Hobb series yet. So that could change because I'll be reading Rainwild in 2025, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So that's my first honorable mention. The second honorable mention that I want to make is kind of a dishonorable mention because it's not on this list. And that is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. That's right, guys. You'll notice that it's completely absent. I was pretty disappointed with that book. It was good. It could have been great. And it just didn't even land a spot on the best books of 2024 for me. And I do have a list of 10 books for you, but that is not on that list. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about the books that I absolutely loved in 2025. And you know the drill. What goes on first? My eyes. My eyes go on first. And let's have a look at this list. The first one on this list, coming in at number 10, is The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third book in Mistborn Era 2. And I just absolutely loved every book in Mistborn Era 2, but Bands of Mourning stands out for me as the best book in that series. And that's a tough call because they're all really good. It may be my favorite series from Brandon Sanderson right now. I just really, really enjoyed it. So, Bands of Mourning coming in at number 10. I highly recommend. If you have read Mistborn Era 1 and you've been on the fence with Era 2, check out Era 2. It may just be for you. Oh, I'm a poet, and I didn't know it. Okay, all right, let's move on to number 9, guys. And number 9 is Recursion by Blake Crouch. I absolutely love Recursion. I'm really enjoying Blake Crouch as an author right now, and Recursion is the only book I've read of his in 2024, and I just absolutely loved it. It was fast-paced, gripping, edge of your seat so much of the time, and it was well-paced, well-written. I just had a blast. So that's coming in at number 9 for me. I'm so happy I read it. I hope you will as well. Coming in at number 8 is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Now, I read both Vicious and Vengeful in 2024, and they're both really good, but Vicious tends to still be the one that sticks with me. It's the one I think about the most. It's probably the better of the two books, but it's a really fine line because they're both excellent books. And I can't wait for Victorious. I know V.E. Schwab has said she's trying to get that done, hopefully this year even. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, so far, Vicious is definitely the best book in that series so far. But read them both, guys. They're both so good. All right, so I'm going to set that there. And we're going to move on to Tomb of Gods by Brian Moreland. And I did do a video review of this, guys, if you're interested in checking that out. It was my patron pick for the final quarter of 2024. And it is just a rip-roaring adventure based around an excavation of an ancient Egyptian tomb. It involves so much mystery and folklore and action. It's just a thrill ride, guys. I absolutely had a blast. The secrets that are unveiled at the deeper layers of this story just wowed me. As a huge fan of ancient Egypt, archaeology in general, I think is really cool as well. So yeah, it was really great for me. Check out my review if you're interested in knowing more. Okay? All right, so the next one I'm going to talk about is Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker by Patricia Meredith. This was the first cozy mystery that I read from her, and she reminds me so much of Agatha Christie in all the right ways, but she's also got her own unique flair and her own unique perspective on the world that she's writing about, and it was just a wonderful story. I read 2 books from her in 2024, actually. The other one is Death of a Christmas Tree Salesman, and I read that in December because it's a Christmas mystery, and that one was really good as well. But the one that stands out to me the most is Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, and I'm really excited to read more in the series. I'm going to be reading more from her this year, and I highly recommend it, but this book just wowed me. For a first book in a series, and I believe the first book she's ever written, fantastic, guys. Fantastic. I loved it. All right, so we're going to move on to the next book on this list. Coming in at number 5 is The Toll by Neal Shusterman. This is the final book in the Ark of a Scythe trilogy, and oh wow, what a banger, guys. He nailed the ending to this series perfectly, in my opinion. Some people don't feel that way, and that's totally fine. It just didn't work for some people that read it, but I absolutely loved it, and I highly recommend this trilogy. It is a young adult trilogy, but it feels very much on the adult side of young adult. It's very high. It's right on the cusp of adult fiction, and it is so good, action-packed, lots of mysterious things that you get to find out the revelations on, and yeah, it was just a fantastic book. I'm very excited that I read it, and it comes in at number 5 for me. All right, so we're moving on to number 4. And guys, this is a book that you're probably going to be shocked is only at number 4. Because when I read this earlier in 2024, I read it as soon as it came out. It was in the release month. I was so excited about this, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it would be my book of the year. It definitely had potential to be. I still ended up putting it at number 4. That is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. This is the sequel to House in the Cerulean Sea. And I did really love this book. It was the perfect companion to House in the Cerulean Sea, and I wasn't sure if we needed this book when it first got announced, but after reading it, I was positive we absolutely did need this book. But the more I dwelled on it and thought about it, there were other books that just pushed it down a little bit for me, even though it was still a really great read. The first one, I think, is still my favorite, but this is just as good. It deserves its spot on my top 10 list, just not the number 1 slot, unfortunately. But fortunately, I had other books that came in higher. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about those now, okay? And coming in at number 3 is The Shining by Stephen King. This was such a fantastic book. Stephen King is very hit or miss for me. For this book to just wow me like it did, I was so happy that it did. I'm so happy I read it. I watched the movie afterwards, and the movie was really lackluster compared to the book. I did a dual review where I talked about both of them, so you can find that on my channel if you want to. Just type in The Shining Bookish Chaz and you should find the review. This book was absolutely magnificent. I still feel like Salem's Lot is my favorite Stephen King book that I've read so far, but The Shining is a close second. And they're neck and neck, guys. They're both such good stories for vastly different reasons. I'm just really happy that I read this book. Finally, it's been on my radar for a long time. Everybody says, Chaz, you need to read The Shining. So I did, and I loved it. So that is my number 3. Coming in at number 2, and guys, my top 2 was really hard. I struggled with this one because these next 2 books just gave me everything I wanted in a perfect book. And so the first one of those guys is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the first book in his new series. I absolutely loved it. It is a fantasy mystery. It takes place in a world where there are plants and vegetation and weeds and all kinds of different things, herbs and things like that, that are surrounding the countryside and surrounding this world. It's a mystery that involves a death by poisoning. I labeled it botany punk for that reason, because it definitely feels like that. It's fantasy, but it's also a mystery. It's got that strong noir feeling to it, and it's got a Sherlock Holmes type character and a Dr. Watson type character, and the interplay between those two characters is just fantastic. And this was a top tier book for me, guys. I loved everything about this book. I've recommended it to so many people that I want to see read it. I just can't say enough good about this book. So it was my first experience reading Robert Jackson Bennett. And if this is any indication, I have no doubt that I'm going to love this author. Tainted Cup came in at number 2. Oh, it was a real tough decision, guys. And this was one of only a handful of brand new books that I read in 2024. Typically, I don't read a lot of new releases, but I did read this one. And of course, I read Somewhere Beyond the Sea. And then the other book that is on my top 10 list of 2024, the book that was my favorite book of 2024. Yes, this is my book of the year, guys. And that is Empire of the Damned by Jay Kristoff. A highly anticipated book for me. I read Empire of the Vampire in 2023, and it just absolutely blew me away. I heard that he was coming out with the second book in 2024, and I was just on pins and needles waiting. I kept checking the release date to make sure I had the right release date so I could make sure to have it and be ready for it when it arrived. Oh, guys, this is absolutely my book of the year. Number 1 on this list. It's such a good series. It's a gothic horror fantasy. It has all of those elements in it. It's a vampire story, and the vampire legions are constructed in such a way that they kind of form military ranks in a way. It's really fascinating the way he does vampires in this story. And it's got an interview aspect, so kind of like Interview with the Vampire, but a different vampire in this respect. Oh, guys, it's so good. And he added a second major POV in the story this time around, which, that can be really iffy when you do something like that. But man, he pulled it off. I was just blown away again by the second book in this series. So Empire of the Damned, number 1 for me. You must read this series. If you like vampires at all, if you like horror, it's kind of horror light. It's not like really extreme horror, but it's got vampires, and there's a lot of vampire-y stuff in it. So you're gonna get some blood and gore, you're gonna get some violence and scary things happening. So yeah, it's definitely a horror, but it's more on the lighter side of horror because it really delves into the fantasy aspect of that. So I highly, highly recommend this series. It is an epic, epic tale, and he has finished the final book in the series. He's got a release date for it coming out in November of 2025. So that's going to be another day one read for me as soon as it comes out. I just can't wait. So, and I think it's the final book in the series. I could be wrong. If it is, I'm looking for a really epic conclusion. And I'm going to try not to have too high expectations because, sometimes it's hard to really land that ending. But I have every confidence in Mr. Kristoff that he can pull it off. So, that is the end of my list of the best books I read in 2024. Let me know in the comments what you think of my list. Let me know what your favorite reads of 2024 were. And until next time, guys, make sure that you read more books, and I will talk with you soon. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to my patrons. I really appreciate all that you do to support the channel. Thank you so very much.